I think I preferred Martin Beeby, or whatever that was. That was good. I don't have a moustache today, I'm sorry. My picture does include a moustache. I feel like I've shortchanged you a little bit by not having one today. But what I'm going to talk to you today about is CSS3 and HTML5. Can everyone hear me, by the way? Yeah. That's a good start. So my Twitter handle is the Beebs. If you've got any questions throughout the session, you can hit up the Beebs on Twitter, or the ubelly tag. Is that being monitored? Or there's a ubelly tag as well. Ask any questions you like. I'll try and respond to anything I get. Be careful to spell it the Beebs, though, because I've been having a lot of trouble recently with Justin Bieber. He's stole my name, basically. I don't think it's at the Beebs, but every dyslexic Justin Bieber fan in the world has been messaging me. We're not the same guy. And also, I don't want you guys to be asking him CSS3 questions, because I don't think he knows. So it's EE for me, IE for Justin Bieber, bubblegum pop legend. So you might be wondering why someone from Microsoft, because that's where I'm from, is talking to you about the modern web, or modern browsers, or CSS3 or HTML5. And the fact is, in the last 24 months, we've kind of come a long way in what we've been doing around IE9, around HTML5, and around CSS3. We have a legacy which precedes us, and we get a lot of digs for that legacy, understandably, in many cases. One of the things that we've done well with IE9, and I'm not going to talk about IE9 all the time, by the way, this is just an introduction, is we listened to the community, we got their feedback, and we went back and improved our product. And it's something which we're trying to do with Windows, with our PHP on Windows. We're trying to constantly get feedback about PHP on Windows, how we could make it better, how we can make it a viable hosting platform for PHP. So IE9 is an example of where we've done that. We went to the community, we've really asked them, and really got their opinions. And just quickly, I just want to show you a quick little video about IE9. I know I'm sorry about this, but it just gives you the opinions and kind of some of the market research that we did around IE9, so that we could really, well, you'll see for yourself. So I'm just going to start the video now.
For the last 10 years, in my opinion, Microsoft have consistently got it right.
Internet Explorer has been unbelievable because it's so good. What else can I say?
Do they really think that we're going to
prefer other browsers? No way.
Internet Explorer set the standards for other browsers. It's the legacy that will not die.
Visually, IE6 set new expectations about the way the web should look. Then IE7 brought along transparent PNGs. And I just said, wow.
There's been a complete lack of
problems and frustrations.
Have Microsoft given us the support all the bloody time?
I've always found it plays nicely.
It really is inexplicable how its performance set such a high expectation.
Ridiculously great is how I describe their efforts to date.
I haven't
got a bad
thing to
say about
the old Internet Explorer.
Big
round of applause.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting a round of applause. That's good. Yeah, we've been making some changes in our organization, the way that we build IE9, the way that we take community feedback. And the internet's changed an awful lot since we released IE6 in 2001. When it was released, it was kind of a good browser. It's done lots of cool things. But over time, it's got a little bit stale, to say the least. Caused a hell of a lot of headaches for you. I was previously a developer since I was 16 for 12 years. I've joined Microsoft a year ago. And I stayed up late nights trying to fix browser incompatibilities. And whilst I'm at Microsoft, and one of the things that I wanted to do when I was at Microsoft was to encourage Microsoft and to do everything I could possibly do to make sure that we don't make those same mistakes again with our browsers moving forward. As I say, the internet was a much different beast in 2001. Wikipedia had only been around for a few months when we released IE6. YouTube wasn't there. And Ajax was just a bleach. So I don't know how many amongst you are HTML5 or front-end developers or server-side. So how many people are server-side developers? And how many people would consider themselves front-end developers? And how many people are one-man sort of full-service agencies? So as I kind of expected, it was kind of more of a server side generally. I think that was the feedback there. So why would someone working on the server side care about what we're doing in the browser with HTML5 and CSS3? Well, I think any good server-side developer really has to understand the front end of their websites, the way that users consume their sites, so that they can understand how they can architecture better servers, better services, better APIs. I know for a fact that maybe 7 years ago, I wasn't thinking about JSON APIs or how I'd interact with mobile clients. Things change because of the way that they're actually consumed. Although I'm doing very much similar things in terms of server-side technology, the way they're consumed is very different. So HTML5 probably won't, there's a little bit down there on that t-shirt. I know HTML5. What the hell? Something's going off. How to meet ladies. It won't help you meet ladies, but it'll probably help you foster better relationships with front-end developers. So this talk's just going to talk around HTML5, CSS3, some of the cool things which you can do with it, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that you have to do to make it work in older browsers. So what is HTML5? When I talk about HTML5, I'm talking really about the W3C standard of HTML5. That's the version that that's the standard that we work to as Microsoft with IE9. So we're working to implement that particular standard. It's often people like me from Microsoft will get up on stage and talk about HTML5 and talk about an umbrella of products like SVG or WebGL or WebSockets. When I say HTML5, I hope to mean just the standard, which W3C are talking about. But forgive me if I do fall into that seductive trap of calling everything new and fashionable HTML5. It's obviously still under development. No browser currently has 100% compatibility with HTML5. And we're all working and pushing forward to make it more interoperable and making sure that it's a better experience for developers. And an important thing about HTML5 is it really needs to be done the right way. And we need to, as web developers now, start working with it, providing feedback to the browser vendors to make sure that the versions that they do release are interoperable. So standards are good. We probably might not have said that a few years at Microsoft. And there's a few things in IE9 and HTML5 which have been standardized for the better. For example, XML HTTP request, which is the basis of every AJAX request, wasn't standardized until HTML5. So we went back and the HTML5 working group, all the big browser vendors and Nokia and people like that as well, all went together and standardized the old stuff. They obviously standardized the new stuff which is coming, the new tags, the new, all the sort of, everything around HTML5. And one of the important things is they standardize the way that errors happen in a browser. So previously, different browser vendors would have different ways of dealing with incorrect syntax. So if you take that example where I've got a span, which spans a p tag, that's invalid markup, and each browser vendor would actually implement the error handling for that differently, which would mean that the CSS would be corrupt and different for each browser, and the JavaScript would work differently because the DOM would be in a different state. Well, we've standardized how we should handle errors so that those sorts of inconsistencies don't happen, because as much as we'd like it not to be the case, this kind of code happens all the time on the web. And as browser vendors, we have to support it or failover or error in the same way so that we can make sure that developers don't have to worry about, well, what happens if I make a mistake? And one of the things that we think is really important at Microsoft in terms of all these standards is to make sure that they're testable. Now, you will see our own test suites. You'll see Google's test suites. You'll see Mozilla's test suites. But really, they're not independent. We're all showing off the performances of our browsers in some ways. But there is a test harness run by W3C, which anyone can commit to, anyone can write tests for, and I'd encourage anyone which is interested in trying to improve interoperability, I can't even say that word, between browsers, wants them to work the same across all browsers, to find bugs in our browser, to find bugs in our competitor's browser, write test cases, submit them to W3C, so that we can all benefit as a community. Because there's only 820 tests currently, and that's nowhere near enough. So this is this was done or updated or refreshed by W3C 10th of February. And it shows the top-level features of HTML5. So attributes, audio, video, canvas, foreign content. These are the class names for the tests, the buckets of those tests, which make up 820 tests. And it shows all of the recent browser vendors. So we've got our release candidates, Chromium 9, Firefox 4, Beta 11, and the WebKit Nightly. And it shows you the percentages which they pass those tests. That doesn't mean that when we've got 100% there, that we're 100% compliant on audio in HTML5. It means we're 100% compliant with the current tests which have been submitted to W3C. So you can see from just that, no one's implementation's perfect. And that only tests a really small portion of HTML5. As a community, we need to get around the whole market and encourage everyone, not just to implement new features, but to get the solid ones right. Because this will be the stuff which really hurts in 10 years' time. This will be the IE6s in 10 years' time. These kinds of features, if they're not implemented correctly across all browsers, then you won't be able to use the audio tag 100% the same in every browser. And you should be able to. Why not? You know, we've lived this pain for far too long. So I've got a little URL. It's bit.ly/submit HTML5 tests. It goes through the process of submitting a test to W3C. You can also submit your test to the other group which run HTML called WhatWG, the What Working Group. They'll accept your test as well. Great place to submit them to. It's really up to you where you go or where you put them, because Google will commit any good tests back to W3C as well. So, you know, submit anywhere, but submit. So I'm just going to show you quickly an example of a HTML5 site, just so that if anyone's under any illusion as to what they are. And I'm going to show you a site from BMW, produced by EMC Consulting, if I have internet connection. Which I don't. Bear with. 1 second. It makes it difficult doing a web demonstration when you don't have the internet. So I'm going to have to do this through mime. But imagine a car, right? You can basically go and see this example for yourself at Joy Defines the Future. And it's an example of a 3D rotating car built completely in HTML5 using the canvas tag. So let me just get back to my slides. Bear with me 1 second. I'm just going to try and connect to this connection because it is pretty important that I have internet connectivity. It's funny, this worked before the session. Talk amongst yourselves, you know. Anyone got any good jokes? Hey, hold on. We've got connections. Yeah. What's Chrome? Well, I'm not denying that. Oh, no. Yeah, if you've got it, that would be great. Let's see how much I can get through without internet connectivity. Just going to have to go a quick fast forward because of that little problem there. So that's roughly what HTML5. You have to imagine what it looks like. I'm sure you've all seen HTML5 stuff, right? CSS3 is obviously an evolution of CSS, all the previous versions of CSS, and it kind of makes things possible which just weren't possible before. It brings the sort of things we've been able to do in print design for years and just can't really do on the web. Or you can do on the web, but you kind of have to make it really hacky with JavaScript. So things like, I don't know, border radius, for example, or drop shadows, or, well, we'll come on to a few more later. I talked about some of the technologies, HTML5 and CSS3, but then there's other stuff, like WebSockets, web storage. We have, we're unlike other competing browsers, we don't have an implementation of WebSockets built into our browser. But if you go to, we have an interoperability website where you can download a plugin which enables WebSockets for developers. So you can test out our implementation of WebSockets, but we haven't put it in live in our browser. The implementation of SVG, which will bring sort of the idea of vector-based graphics. And Geolocation, which is now in all major browsers. ECMAScript, which is the evolution of JavaScript. It's the actual standard name for JavaScript. And one of the cool things about the whole standardization of JavaScript is it's become a lot more similar. So you find a lot less bugs. Although I think, with libraries like jQuery, it kind of mitigated a lot of those bugs anyway. But the new versions and our new JavaScript engines are a lot more interoperable. So the stuff that you develop in one browser is much more likely to work in another because we're following this standard. So here, I would then go and show you the Killers HTML5 website, which you can go and have a look for yourself, thekillersmusic.com/HTML5. And it's an example of all of those technologies I mentioned, barring WebSockets. You can scroll this page. It has a really nice canvas animation as you move around. You can go into the sky and see SVG, vector-based stuff happening. Then you can see video coming in. There's audio content. It's a complete mismatch of all these technologies and a great example of how it could really work on real sites. And it pushes the boundaries of kind of what you can do on the web. And if you look at the code, it's not as hacky to achieve these things. Like, that's the main goal for me, or the main thing that's so important for me about these new technologies. You don't have to hack to make things that really should just work. So, luckily I've got a lot of this bits on slides, but it is a lot of tags. So, well, what is HTML5? If you want to go and set up a HTML5 document today, well, what does that look like? Well, it's a lot cleaner, for starters. So if we look at the doc type declaration at the top there, that's a lot cleaner than the kind of crazy stuff that's on the other. I don't really understand what that stuff means. I always just cut and paste it from, I was going to say, my favorite search engine. I just cut and paste it from that. And, but, HTML5, you just have to do that doc type HTML just to switch it into HTML5 mode. And then we bring around, there's plenty of new elements. This is just a handful of those elements, like header, hgroup, nav, aside, footer, and I'm going to go through all of these individually. So if we compare the HTML4 document to a HTML5 document, you can see we've got all this gumph, which no one, just hands up who actually knows what that means. Hands up, keep your hands up if you could verbatim write it. Yeah, see, it's useless, isn't it? So we have that, the idea that, it's kind of simplified it a lot. That's the minimum thing that you can have is just that doc type in HTML. That's the most minute way that they could describe that, so it's brilliant. Obviously, the HTML, the tag as well, we've just got the language as English, whereas, here we have another thing which I don't fully understand. I know what it is, I kind of get what it does, but I don't really know what it really does. It tells the browser something, right? And we have the charset UTF-8. Well, you can use any charset you want, but that's obviously the one which most people would use. And you'll notice that I've put in head and body in the HTML5 document. They're not required, actually. Can you not see that down? Sorry, that projector's a little bit in the way. I can see some people ducking down. But head and body tags and stuff, they're superfluous in HTML5. You don't need to put them in. Browsers are smart enough to figure out that they should be there and will put them in for you. So browsers already do this. If you just go and put a browser even in HTML4 and miss off the body, it won't validate, of course, but it'll work. Browsers get it. So when you go to validate, and there's a validator at w3.org check, it's a lot kinder. Like there's not, you can remove as many of these tags as you like, apart from the important ones like the doc type and the HTML to tell it's HTML5. But you don't have to have the head, you don't have to have the body tags if you don't want. Also, HTML5 is not, the HTML5 standard isn't XHTML. So those stuff where The idea where you had to have a document which is perfectly structured as XML, as we would have in XHTML, that's not required anymore. So, for example, here you'll see we have an image tag which doesn't have a close on it. Still going to validate. It's fine. A browser can figure that out. And because browser vendors have, as I mentioned earlier, figured out how they should handle errors like that in a consistent way, developers don't need to worry about that specifically. But I just would caveat that. Just because you don't have to do it, just because it doesn't have to be valid like that way, it's probably still good practice if you're doing XHTML to still do that. It just looks better, it looks cleaner, and if you're like me, with ADD, like attention deficit disorder, and has to have all their coat cangs facing the right way, then that sort of stuff really bugs me as a developer, so it's quite important to make sure that if you are doing XHTML, still do that, it's still good stuff. There's a spec called HTML5 as well, which does require you to format your documents in an XML structure, but by default, HTML5 doesn't require that. It's a much more loose specification in that sense. And another example of that is the script tag. We often, in script, would type script type text JavaScript. It's been a long time since I've wrote script type equals text VB script. No one uses really very much else. So why not make the default JavaScript? So that's what they did. So now you can put the script tag in there without that type. And you could always do that prior to this anyway. Everyone could do that. It was just never good practice because it wouldn't validate. It will validate now. So I talked a little bit about how the sort of language is the markup story is a little bit less rigid in its specification. It's much more rigid on the actual vendors though. What we have to do, the specification is huge. 1,200, 1,400, massive amount of pages. But actually it's quite readable if you have got a spare week to read through the whole specification. But it's really explains in detail what browser vendors need to do to make sure that they meet the spec. So first talk about one of the new tags, which is the header tag. And from the specification, it represents a group of introductory or navigational aids. So basically, anything in your document which is navigational, you'd use the nav tag for. And you'd use it in this sort of way. You'd use the header tag, sorry. I've completely lost where I am. You'd use the header tag. And the header tag can contain lots of different things. And in here we have a H group, a H1 and a H2, a closing H group and a header. When people think about headers, they think, well, I've got one header on my web page. But that's not really, you don't have to have just one on your page. A header could represent not just the header of a page, but also the header of an article, or a subsection header. You can have as many headers as you want. Don't think that it's just one per page. Then we have the nav element. Now you can wrap a nav element inside a header, but it doesn't have to be. It can be outside of a header. And you use it to wrap navigational links. You shouldn't ever use it to wrap things like ads or links off to other sites, but you should make it the navigation of your internal website. The whole point of the semantic web is to try and make it easier for computers or machines or browsers to understand the website that they're delivering so that they can add value to that website. So for example, if you have this nav element and you marked it up correctly, then a browser's then capable of making a proper document outline and then structuring it so maybe it's easier for screen readers, or maybe it's just easier, there's an easier way to navigate it. But if you do mark up your code in a semantic way, it means that machines are much more likely to be able to understand what you're writing. So you also shouldn't put like copyright links or anything like that in your nav. They should go firmly in your footer tag. And the markup would be something like this. So nav with a UL, an LI, and then your menu name. Probably want an A tag in there as well, so it probably won't do anything. An aside, it's a new tag, and you use this to wrap content which is not the main focus of the content. It's really good for the sidebar or for pull quotes in flow text. But it's stuff which you can kind of say, people have told me, oh, the aside tag would be really useful for search engines because you could say, oh, this is the main content and this is the aside content. That's naive because search engines don't even use meta tags anymore. They're not going to be letting the author tell them what's important on that page or not. But I think there are other use cases where this sort of information, telling a computer what's important to the author of the web page and what's not as important, is important, but probably not on PageRank. Then we have article. The next two tags are probably the most interesting ways of, the ones that I have the most trouble with. So article is what you would expect. It represents a part of the page. So if you imagine a standard web page with, a piece of content, then the main piece of content would be the article. But if you imagine a page which had lots of blog posts on it, then each of those would be an article. So an article, think about a piece of content which you would distribute externally. So a piece of content which you could put in an RSS feed. So anything which is a distinct object on your page which you may distribute, even if you don't distribute, should be wrapped in an article tag. But don't think of it as a magazine article, because it could be anything. It could be a video. It could be, think of it as a distinct article, a distinct object. So the way that we use that would be to have an article tag with a H1, which would be the header for that, and then we could include the footer there. So when I said earlier that footers aren't just navigation and footers aren't just for the footer and navigation of your page, they can actually become the footer and header of an article. So it's a way of marking up this whole page. And I'll come to this with an example later. So section. Now this one's tricky because it's pretty similar to an article. You might think this would be a replacement for divs, but it's not. So lots of people misuse this and wrap their articles in sections. But actually, what it should be used for is similar to an article, so any piece of content, but a piece of content that isn't distributed. That's the way that I understand it anyway. So it's not a generic content container element. If you want to do like a main content div, you'd still use a main content div. Don't use a section to describe that area. Don't use a section when you're really just doing it for presentational purposes or you're trying to apply it to hook in a style or a CSS tag. You should use it as a, for pieces of information which you wouldn't distribute but are sections of your page. So you almost always use the article tag rather than the section tag. I always think about when I'm looking at a page what it should be. If it doesn't fit into the neat categorization of an article, it doesn't fit to an aside, and it doesn't fit as a nav, then it's probably a section. We have a footer. Again, this can be footers of all sorts of content, the footer of your page, but it could be a footer of an article, a footer of an aside. In here, you would place your copyright data, terms of service, those sorts of links. They wouldn't go in your navigation because they're not really site navigation. They're more information, so they would just go directly in your footer. But your footer could contain a nav element as well if you wanted. If you wanted a nav element in top and bottom. You want to put stuff like who wrote the file. So in a blog post, that example where we have lots of blog posts, a footer might have the information about how many comments were on that blog, who wrote that blog, who wrote that information about that, and related documents. So if we take a standard blog here, this is kind of how I would take it and make it HTML5able. We'd add a header, nav, section ID, a div ID called content, and a footer. And that would look something like this. Missing a little bit of the color there in this projector. But you see we have a header tag, which wraps our header. Chosen here to have the nav outside of the header, but it could as easily have been in the header. And if they were, it's really up to you whether you want to put navigations in headers. It doesn't matter. But I felt for this particular one, it looks better sitting outside. And then this is really the only example I could think of where I'd use a section, which is it's a piece of content which is relevant. It's a section. It's a bit like an article, but I'd never distribute this on an RSS feed. I'd never pass this over to someone else. It's not an article, so it's a section. Then I have an article down here with a header, and then an aside, which contains a number of sections. So now, this is going to be tricky, because I was going to hopefully break into code. Without web connection, I might have a little bit of an issue with this. But we'll see what we do. I want to show you this example. It's won many awards. It's called nevermindthebullets.com. If you see any of the demos that I showed today, this is the best one to go and have a look at. It's a comic strip which uses the canvas tag to use a parallax scrolling effect. It looks really beautiful. And with all this stuff, I'd really encourage you to go and just view the source. I mean, that's the best thing about HTML5. None of this stuff is... ooh. Yeah, I'm going to have to set it up there. Yeah. I don't want them to log off. I want them to... how can they insult me on Twitter? About the fact that my... No, I'm good, I'm good. No. Okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll see if I've got some files locally which I can show. Okay. So we'll look at the video tag. Does anyone use HTML5 video today? In their sites? Not me. Many people use Flash? Silverlight? Will in the back, representing. So this is how we'd use a video tag, and this is the basic implementation. This is the how you would drop an image, like a video, just like an image into your file, into your page. So all we really need to do is have a video tag with a source which points to an MP4 video with an ID of video. We put that in our page. It's going to look at that source. It's going to play that video. Done. But not quite. There's also a number of different things that you can add to the video tag. So we have this poster, which is when the video is buffering, we're going to show up a little image, or just sort of, you know, a screen grab of that video or something like that, so that we don't just have them looking at a black screen whilst we're buffering. We're going to have a control, we've put there autoplay, so when we come to the site, that video is just going to start autoplaying, so you can annoy your visitors by autoplaying videos if you really want to. You can add controls, so you can pause, fast forward, rewind. You can implement your own controls on video tags, and I'll just show you how to do that in a moment. We also have this option to preload the video, so it does what it says. It preloads before playing. So as soon as the web page starts, it's going to start loading, and then when the user presses play, it's probably going to be buffered enough. You want to use that with caution, especially if you've got lots of videos on a page. You wouldn't want to preload them all, because they'll all just start kicking off when you're loading the page. And we have playback rate. 1 means like regular speed, but you can increment that, increase it to make it go faster or make it go slower by decreasing that value. And you have like width and height like you would any other object. And because it's native as a video tag, you can apply any CSS3 tag style to it as well. So any transforms, shadows, and gradients, whatever you wanted to do. Now, one of the problems with the video tag is that there's a bit of inconsistency with the browser support for codecs. So MP4, which is its base format H.264, which is the sort of, it's what all videos encoded in Flash today is encoded in. You can hook that in, and that's going to work in Safari, in IE9. It used to work in Google. You'll need a plugin to make it work in Google now. And I think that's it. So it works in ours and Safari. And obviously that includes the iPad and the iPhone as well. So H.264, if you want to target the iPhone, iPad, Safari browser, and IE9, you're going to need it in H.264. There's a video codec called Ogthora. I think I pronounced that right. I might have pronounced that wrong. I only ever see it on forum posts. I never actually hear it said aloud. That's an open source video format. It's not quite as good as the alternative open source format, which is WebM, which is, has been released by Google. Now, WebM and Theora, Google are only supporting those two. They're not supporting H.264. So you kind of have to choose which ones you want to support. So, for example, if we just supported WebM, it would only work in Internet Explorer 9, because we support WebM. It would work in Google Chrome, but it wouldn't work in Safari. It wouldn't work on the iPhone. It wouldn't work on the iPad. The benefit of these tags is that we can apply more than one source to a video tag. So, for example, there I've got an MP4 file attached to that video. And if a browser which doesn't support MP4 comes to this page, it's going to say, I don't support MP4, but I'll fall over to the next one, which in this case is OGG. If we had another source in there for WebM, it would fall over to that one. So you can add as many sources in there as you like, which is fine, and it's kind of a way around this problem that none of us have one single codec to work from. But it means that you have to, on your server, encode your videos more than once. You're going to have to do it in H.264. You're going to have to do it in WebM. You might want to do it in Theora. You might want to do it in different baselines for all of those profiles as well. It's kind of really complicated and kind of annoying that we can't, as a browser community, get together and go around one format. But there's lots of legal and political openness reasons for not doing that. And in IE9, we're supporting WebM and H.264, but Safari do have a problem that H.264 is encoded on an iPad on the device. So there's a hardware decoder on the iPad itself. So if they wanted to use anything else, they'd have to use software decoding, which means that if you used HTML5 video on an iPad with software encoding WebM, it would drain the battery terribly. So they either recall all the iPads or they just support, it's tricky for them. I can see why that they have a problem with supporting WebM. So you can get around it, but you're going to have to encode more than once, which is a problem. The video tag has a great API, which is very similar. I don't think I've noticed any differences, really. There's probably subtle niches differences between different browsers. But the API is really, really similar. And actually, you can call it and say stuff like, player, can it play type? And you can ask the different codecs that the browser can check. So you can check all this stuff in JavaScript. You don't have to rely on that manual HTML5 fallback. You can do some really fancy things. I just want to point out as well, after that source, you could also just add a flash video in there as well. You could just literally put an object embed. Or you could put some free-form text. And if it can't play any of these, or it can't play HTML5 video at all, it will play whatever you've put between the closing source tag here and the ending video tag. So you could put like text in there, you could put a flash video, you could put Silverlight video, but you can also check it through the JavaScript API as well. So you can call the player and you can say, can you play the type MP4? Is H.264 baseline supported? And you can be really specific about the baselines and the different types that it will play. And this is kind of the way that most people are today using video in HTML5. One great tool for this, if you don't want to have to code all that stuff yourself, is to use Modernizer. Modernizer is a JavaScript library which basically gives you a way, or an API, which just makes it very easy to detect what a browser can and can't do in HTML5, CSS3, and with video. So, for example, you can say, does this particular browser support Canvas? In Modernizer, you just say modernizer.canvas, and it returns yes or no, or true or false or whatever, or something like that. You can detect if it supports audio or video. It doesn't tell you the level of implementation or how great their implementation is of that particular standard, but it tells you that they generally support it. So in terms of most of the common HTML5 stuff, this is great. But some of the more newer HTML5 stuff, browsers sometimes support it, but don't support it great or not directly to the standard. So you have to watch out for newer stuff. As well as detecting just HTML5 video, Modernizer also allows you to check the profile as well. So you can say, can it play H.264? Can it play WebM? Can it play this, that, or the other? So as well as doing checks on the object, which represents the video player, you can also do things like, here I've created my own little div section, and I've put 4 little links in there with 4 on-click events: slower, play, pause, and faster. And they're going to just fire some little bits of JavaScript. So to make the video go slower, we just go and get the video object. We take the current playback rate, and then we just basically, if it's less than 1, we divide it by 2, so it slows it down. Else it blah 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 blah. You can read JavaScript, right? But that's how you would make a video go slower in JavaScript. If you want to make it go faster, you just increment playback rate, make it go increase and increase and increase. Someone asked me, how far can you go? Can you just keep doing that? So I tried, and there's actually a difference in lots of different browsers. So if you go fast, I think we must have like a hard limit, and I've got to find out with our engineers, but it looks like about 10, we stop getting any faster. But other vendors do just keep going faster and faster and faster and faster, to the point where it's ridiculous, where you press play, it's at the end. But we do just go to a specific level and play it. So that's an example of where we're all doing the basic things the same, but then there's these niche things which will hurt us in a few years if we don't test for them and we don't report them back to the browser vendors. If we want to pause the video, we just take the video element and call the .pause method. And if we want to play, we just call the .play method. Video demo. That probably requires internet, so I'm not going to show it for good reasons.
Can I ask a question at this point about video and the fact you can't play it? How would you recommend How would you recommend people cope with sort of detecting what bitrate video to serve? So you were looking at using a MiFi device, so your computer thinks it's connected via Wi-Fi, but then it's falling onto 3G or GPRS or whatever.
Well, do you know in actual production websites, what I'm doing at the moment is using, there's a great service, and I forget the name of it. There's one which comes to mind, which is not the one I use, called Vidly, which can serve up videos in different rates, and it gives you scripts to be able to determine the kind of connection speeds. There isn't, I don't think in our browser at the moment, there's a way of determining the current network speed. You can kind of determine if it's on or off, but you can't determine it. But there is, like, for example, if you're taking a mobile device, you know that the bit rates or the connectivity is going to be choppy. So you would be able to serve up a different type of baseline based upon that. But yeah, I don't know about other browsers, but I don't think IE9's got a way of saying, you know, how fast is the current connection. You can kind of determine whether it's on or off, but not how fast it is, which is a real pain. Yeah. I think there are experiments. Does anyone know? There are browsers which do that, I'm sure. Yeah, but you've got to figure out that there's a problem. So you can determine that there's no network connectivity. You can determine there is connectivity, but how do you, unless you did something like downloaded an image and figured out how long it took, there's not, I don't think there's a way, I can't think of a way of, there's no API in our browser, I don't believe, unless anyone can correct me. No, it looks like there's not an API which can determine bitrate speed. But I do use those services to determine the rate which you would expect on certain devices. So if a BlackBerry device wanted to serve video, or a iPad, or you can determine the kind of connection rates that they would be hitting. So that's kind of what I do. Vidly is one of the services which I use. You can upload one video and it creates lots of different rates, lots of different types of video, and then you can serve that. And there's a really, yeah. What did you say it again? Brightcode. Oh, I'm really sorry.
Video company that,
Yeah, there's a lot of these little services. There's a lot of services coming out. Yeah, but yeah, okay, they're big, right? Sorry? I don't use it. Sorry. Not that I know of. I'd love to be proven wrong. That's the case of yeah. I don't really know about bitrate, how to determine bitrate of current downloading. You can actually figure out how much has been downloaded in a video. You could probably do some maths on it that way. If anyone knows of a way, come speak to me after. I'd love to know about it. I'll maybe take a look at it. It's my job. So. Is there any more questions about video, by the way, before I move on? Got one here.
Here's a
You mentioned the video formats that all the browsers except Firefox support. Which formats does Firefox support?
I think Firefox supports WebM. They definitely, there's no one which supports all three, as far as I'm aware. So Firefox don't support H.264. I'm pretty sure Firefox supports WebM. I'd be really surprised if they didn't. But they're proponents of Ogtheora, that open source video format, which is it's a great format, and the only sad thing about that format is it's just not quite as good quality as H.264. And when it comes to quality of video, I think that's really important for moving forward. WebM is a comparable video format and quality and playback. It's just this, it's a difficult situation. You can see both sides of that story and why one company would want to do one thing and one company would want to do the other. There's legal reasons, there's political reasons. It doesn't make it any better for developers. And I would just wish that all those problems would go away and we could just pick one Uber codec, which we'd all use and we'd all be happy with. But it looks like we're going to have that pain for a long time to come, unless someone makes some big decisions.
Martin, I think we have a related question.
I was just going to add to that question there. I know for a fact, 'cause I've done a lot of big sites on it, that Firefox 3, 3.5 Plus does OGG, 4 does WebM, that's here, and OGG.
Yeah.
But yeah, you are absolutely...
No H.264.
No H.264 unless you get a plugin for it, which I think
there is
you guys are doing, actually.
See, to sort of tell you the kind of... There is obviously a big thing. There's a lot of people which don't like H.264. One opera evangelist called it H666 to me. So it's, there's a lot of discontent in that thing. I don't really kind of get it. As a developer, I just wish it would work. But it doesn't. So we have to use these video services which can encode more than once. It's going to cost us money. We're going to have to store more than one video. I'll move on quickly to the canvas. This was something which no one thought that we were going to implement in IE9. And we did, and I'm glad that we did. Our implementation up until the RC wasn't quite as good as it could have been. We didn't, there's lots of things that people are trying to do when they're trying to clear the screens and stuff, which I'm not going to go into today, but some of the more complicated scenarios, the stuff which DeviantArt were trying to do, didn't work in our previous, on our IE9 betas. The IE9 team are really, really good at hearing feedback and really putting it into their browser quickly. The team is much more agile and much quicker at implementing than they used to be. And that's why we have Canvas. That's why we now have a very good implementation of Canvas. If you look at our scores to the tests that are currently in W3C, we're doing pretty well there. There's still some way to go probably, but it's a good position. It's a decent implementation of Canvas as well. And you can do the basic stuff in Canvas. You can always achieve 2D. I would love to show you a thing by the Museum of China, which is unlike 3D interface, purely coded in JavaScript, 200 lines of code, which is just incredible. If you look at the equivalent to do it in WebGL, it's a new language and a hell of a lot more code. But so for general sort of 3D stuff, or 2D, 2.5D, sorry, stuff, Canvas is really good. You can achieve incredible stuff. You can build games, and that's one of its most common implementations. I think the reason why Canvas has been really successful in sort of gaming is because of the way the program API works. So as web developers, we kind of have this idea that, that you have objects on a screen, and they're always on a screen, or they're always in the DOM. And if you want to animate them across a screen, you just increment its left value. Yeah? So it moves across the screen over time. With Canvas, you actually, every time you draw the screen, you clear the screen, you draw the screen, you clear the screen, you draw the screen. You don't have any, by default, any structure of objects or anything. It's just a big bitmap canvas on which you draw dots. There's lots of libraries out there which help abstract that. There's one called Easel.js, which is an excellent little library, which makes it more like Flash development. But because of that gamer loop, because what you have to do effectively is you loop 25 times per second, and you redraw the screen on every frame of that tick, on every loop, you redraw the screen. And that's how you achieve this gamer loop. And that's how people develop in XNA, for the Xbox. That's how they develop for all sorts of gaming platforms. So I think that's why it's really popular with gamers. But it's very difficult as a web developer sometimes to get your head around that idea. We have a thing on visitmix.com/lab. It's very difficult to draw canvas. I didn't really show any of that code, but just to draw that little thing, you need to know a little bit about JavaScript. If you've got an Illustrator file and you just want to put it on a canvas, for example, we have a little thing in visitmix.com/lab, which can take an Illustrator file and convert it into the JavaScript, which you can use in Canvas. And I think we'll be seeing way more of these sorts of tools where it will make it more accessible to people which don't know JavaScript as well. But to do HTML5 today, Canvas HTML5, you're going to really need to be good at JavaScript. I'd love to show that demo. I'm not going to have time, sorry. Geolocation. We put that in the RC, our release candidate. So now all the major browsers support it. You can go away and use it. Basically, what it does, it has a JavaScript API where you can go call geolocation. It gives you you pass two values over to delegates, which one on if it's successful and it finds a location, one if it errors and it can't find a location. And then it gives you a lat long, which then you can use in your programming model. I have an example of it, but because of the internet, I won't be able to show. But geolocation is really good. I've not seen any decent implementations, real-world examples of where it's used. And if anyone's got any, I'd love to see them. But it's a very interesting technology, which I think's got a lot of legs. The only problem is with it, you have to actually ask, obviously, the user for permission to ask where they are. So there is some user experience issues where you say, you find where I am, and then it asks you, do you want to allow? And I suppose that's kind of cool, but on some situations, that kind of gets in the way of what you're trying to do. So generally safe to use. All the things that I've talked to today, there are ways around making them work in older browsers. I'm not going to have time to go through any of those because none of my demos worked. But things like the canvas tag, things like DOM storage, Ajax navigation, cross-document messaging, geolocation, semantic elements, audio and video. There's ways to get around how you can support things like IE6, but still support these in your websites today by using graceful degradation. Core and events, and CSS3, 2D transforms, backgrounds and borders, fonts, media query selectors, colors and opacity are all usable today. Start here if you don't know what you're doing with HTML5. Modernize it just by looking through the code and looking how they test for the support. It shows you a lot of the ways that you can build sites which will fall over gracefully. JavaScript's really the way that you do it. So you would either apply an effect or apply a CSS3 style using JavaScript, or you'd fall back, or you can, Modernizer actually allows you to abstract the CSS so that you can apply CSS3 things only to browsers which support them. So I'd recommend so strongly if you're going to do any HTML5 or CSS3 development, take a look at Modernizer. There's tons of shims and polyfills. If our browser doesn't support WebSockets, for example, there is a JavaScript implementation of that. There's a great list of polyfills at bit.ly/HTML5 polyfills. It's on GitHub. Yeah, and there's just tons of ways that you can support these HTML5 features in older browsers successfully and fall over gracefully. I'm going to really whip through CSS3. Basically, this kind of stuff, CSS3 enables you to achieve things that just weren't possible previously. So this is an example of a sign that I walked past at Marks and Spencer's where you have an image which has got a border around it. Now, how do you do that in regular CSS? You don't, right? You just do you just get an image. You just make an image and you put a border around it. Well, you can do it pretty easily by taking that image of a roast dinner and applying a border radius of 105 pixels and a 10-pixel border, and you will get that effect. And if you want to see the demo that I did of how you implement that, if you go to bit.ly/border-radius, you'll see the demo where I walked through how you actually would achieve something like that. You can also transform any element. So because video is part of the page now, you can move it, you can scale it, you can skew it, and it's really cool, like with videos, to be able to move them like that. You couldn't do that. It was almost impossible to do that with just regular Flash without, you still have to have that section around it, which would actually be a rectangle, and then you'd move it inside that rectangle. But this is a fully transformed object. We also have, when we want to transform that video there, we have this thing called vendor prefixes. Sadly, on some of our CSS3 properties, you're going to see these. So WebKit have one, Mozilla have one, MS have one. And it means that we're not completely confident with our implementation of those effects, those CSS3 effects. So we vendor prefix them to make sure that the developer's aware that they're not completely finished and baked. When they are finished, like our border radius implementation is completely finished. I don't know if WebKit and Mozilla now are, but when we implemented it, they weren't ready. So they still had their vendor prefixes on there. When we do support it fully, the prefix, and it just becomes border radius. And whenever you're writing these where you support Mozilla, WebKit, and then the actual standard-based one, you should always apply the standard last. Because it means that when WebKit do, they will maintain this WebKit/border radius property, but when they do support the border radius, it will override that property. So they won't just remove that WebKit border radius. And obviously, web fonts. This is one of the coolest things, as a designer, being able to use real typography. It's really simple to use. The problem is that, again, we don't all agree on which format we should use. But this one's much easier to solve, because if you go to somewhere like FontSquirrel or Typekit, FontSquirrel is completely free for most of their fonts. They're royalty free. Typekit, you pay a little bit of money for the hosted. But they will download a piece of JavaScript, which you just put in your page, and then you can use that font throughout your website, knowing that it's going to work well across most browsers. Certainly all HTML5 and CSS3 capable browsers, but some other browsers as well. Because browsers supported this kind of font format for a long time. So there's my resources. I'd recommend if you want to learn more about HTML5 and CSS3, HTML5 and JavaScript to some extent, HTML5 by Bruce Lawson and Remy Sharp's a great book to read. All this stuff's going to be on ubelly.com later on today. If you don't know what ubelly.com is, we're a little stand just outside there. It's web developers which work for Microsoft, talking about Microsoft, talking about our product, talking about our browsers, our phone, our platforms. We have a deal at the moment for Windows hosting. We'll give anyone 2 months free Windows hosting if they provide feedback. And if you've got projects where you need to use Windows hosting or you want to put PHP on Windows, come speak to us, and we'll see what we can do with hosting and helping you out with those projects. So that's all. Thank you very much. I'm very sorry about the technical problems that I had throughout the talk.